Talks. I was supposed to be on yesterday, but before I get started out the gate tonight, I received some medical news that had me really rocked, um, and it was the lifestyle that brought it to this degree, and it's what it is. So, um, where I'm going with that part of it is, and then I'm not looking for the violin music, the sympathetic thing. I may seem a little out of sorts because I'm still chewing on it because it hit me like a ton of bricks. Um, but I had a lot of support from people who chimed in and said they got me in their prayers and don't give up and all of this kind of stuff. So knowing that people care and other people care, but it's nice to be reminded of that, especially when we all go through adversities, especially medical adversities, that will cause your life to change so dramatically or begin to change dramatically. And why I'm putting it out there on tonight's podcast is whatever you do in life, try to make, and I've said this in other shows, I've said this on on the 50 Shades of Red podcast that airs Thursdays, that guest, I'm guest on that, to make better choices on anything you do. Try to make your choice count, try to make your choice better, because there are repercussions later. And I noticed a lot of like, what is he talking about? I used to drink a lot back in the old days, and now it's causing my vision to diminish rapidly. Um, and the doctor said, it's irreversible. There's nothing you can do. Um, this is where you're at. We can slow the progression, but we can't stop it. So who knows how long I'll be able to stare at folks or be on the podcast or anything. But it was a very, you know, it was a very to the chest thing, and I think, in all honesty, you guys need to know that, um, because it's important that you make the right decisions in your life. I'm older. I can't change the past, but I can help people in the present to be better and do the right things. All right, so the theme tonight is voluntary immigration, involuntary immigration, and current issues today regarding those issues. And I tell you, on the last podcast, I had an issue with a Haitian security guy, and those who know or had watched that podcast understand that I clean buildings. It's one of the many hats I wear. I put it that way. Um, and I guess he was having a bad day, and we befriended each other in the 18 months I've been doing that building. And then for that one day, he thought I insulted his culture, and I insulted Haiti. So he went on this rampage and said that all African Americans, women and men, are slaves to white America because white men, not women, according to him, women, and it's not to keep beating us up, and it's not to keep, but just to set the table, as they say. Women are just like, in his opinion, a byproduct. White women are, and white men run this country, and all blacks are slaves, according to him. Regardless of the fact that he's, other than hearing his accent, that he, on first approach, you would think he's just another black guy. But he's not factoring all of that in, because I guess he was angry over something, and for whatever reason, he decided to dissolve our friendship over that. So after I shared it on my last podcast, and after that, I was I wanted to find the true definition of immigration. I was with a When my classmate and I were undergrads, we got into a similar discussion. We didn't get in an argument. It wasn't contentious or anything like that. We were talking about immigration. She says, everybody's an immigrant. I said, oh no, blacks were slaves. We were property and all of this stuff. So I was chewing on that thought, and I went and I looked up the definition of immigration. And the Webster's definition of immigration. It's simple. It's a movement of people into another country or region to which they are not native. And that is the definition of immigration. But there's different types, and I think we really don't. When people come over to improve their lives, take advantage of the American dream and all of these things, and then there's involuntary immigration, where like slaves, you're forced to be packed into ships, come to America, work without wage. Um, there's no real light at the end of the tunnel for you as a slave. You're not even considered a person. You're considered property. You know. Um, what I ran across even in that is something with Ben Carson. Now, for those who don't know who Ben Carson is, he's a brilliant neurosurgeon who is now in charge of, and I'm looking at it here on the screen. So just give me. Remember, I'm all over the place tonight. I'm not really prepared for it. That's why I had to start because of the medical news, and I'm just trying to just kind of get through it. Um, Ben Carson was addressing his uh, housing and urban development staff because he's the secretary, and this was an address to the staff, and he refers to slaves as immigrants, and I think because of the definition of immigration, that is correct. Technically speaking, we're all immigrants, but we're involuntary immigrants as opposed to those that come for enrichment of their lives and to make their life better and things like that. Um, so there's a difference. But what was interesting, and I kept going into his article, he because he got slammed for it, and the funny part about it is, when I first read that there was wide criticism about that. Um, he got slammed by Republican. He's Republican. And he got slammed by his own party. I didn't. It didn't really specify why they disagreed with it, but he had to actually use the general definition, which I explained to you earlier, of people moving to another land that they're not native of. So when he gave the speech, and I'll read some of it to you guys. Um, he said there were other immigrants. Well, he started this way. He said that's what America is about: a land of dreams and opportunity. And then he added, he said there were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder, but they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, grandsons, great granddaughters, and sons, and so forth and so on, might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land. Um, I don't understand why anybody would get mad at that because the genesis of any immigration, when we see immigration, we know it has ambiguity to the word, but we normally look at it as I'm leaving my motherland to come to America or wherever you're going. This doesn't have to be the United States, but you come to another land to prosper and to do better for your family and things like that. And so I couldn't understand when he said this. He's saying even though they were slaves, even though they were involuntary immigrated to the United States to be to for their labor, they still had a dream that one day, just like Martin Luther King, Malcolm, Medgar, all had dreams that one day and Malcolm, that we would be better African Americans, or our children and the lineage down the line will be better than our forefathers, than our ancestors did when they came here. And so he says here he wanted his impulse to homogenize our diverse origins lumps everyone together without making important distinctions about the different pathways that dictated people's arrivals, which is true. But and he was and I think he meant well in that statement. And he was talking about how slaves were chattel. There were violent systems of conquest and domination, which is true. Which hits to the point that our ancestors weren't a violent people. They were just pretty much doing their own thing. Someone came up with the idea of involuntary immigration, decided to capture over 12 million captives, bring them here, and help develop this fine country of ours. Um, but we paid the price. And then when I was thinking about it all, because I have to remember the guy's name that we were discussing. That's a candidate. I guess he's a Democratic candidate. He's an Asian man who wants to pay. And I hope my niece is watching so she can kind of clear this up. He wants everyone to once if he's elected president, he's running for presidential candidacy, and he wants to give everybody $1,000 once they turn 18. And the first thing, and when we covered that last week, the first thing I thought about was, what about the slave reparation? Why not do that? And that would be very white popular, probably even cheaper for the 13% of us that live in the United States. Should we get reparations for being being born into for our ancestors being born in slavery, being forced into this country, so forth and so on? Because years ago there were discussions about reparations. Um, so I just thought of it that way. It seems a little bit off the path, but that's what I thought. But that's a whole different planet, you know. So yeah, Ben Carson, brilliant, former brilliant neurosurgeon, took a few hits on it. So he had to actually change it. He said you can be an involuntary immigrant. He adopted a generic definition, which is the one I just read, which is simply a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. I don't know if the permanently part is there. Through my experiences, I watched people immigrate and come over and work beside them, and some very decent people I work beside. And then, as I shared in my last podcast, I've had some people that come over get comfortable um, and have no love and respect for this country. And it's not to put anybody on blast, but these are my experiences. I've worked beside people who listen to something political and then badmouth how the country is and how great their country is and where they come from, but you're still raping the system by coming over here making tons of money, you send it home, fine, you know. But I've worked aside some who, for whatever reason, decide that they're not going to file taxes or they can't file. Maybe they're not legal to file taxes. So when they get the returns, and being a supervisor or manager at that time, giving them their returns, watching them toss them on in the trash. I was like, what? They're not going to file taxes? And they're like, no, we don't do that. So you know, they don't have their purpose is one dimensional, is to make money, bam out the country, and then just send the money home or you know take advantage of the system. But yeah, the slave narrative and immigrant narrative are in two entirely different experiences, and that's so true. Um, Involuntary. Can you imagine someone coming into your home today, marching you out of your home, and saying that you're going to go to work for such and such, and now your property and all of these things. It's such a dynamic that's so different as compared to how we're used to looking at immigration as an opportunity for advancement. Why I brought all of this up as tonight's topic is that I don't want people, especially millennials and Generation X, Generation Y people, to forget those origins of immigration. When we listen to the political talks with Trump and the fence, and I'm not saying the fence, yeah, the wall, whatever the fence, and immigration and illegal immigrants coming over, and there's so many different narratives to immigration. Let's not forget, um, immigration comes in, I guess you could say, and not to offend anyone, in two flavors. You have voluntary immigration, involuntary immigration, and it those two parameters need to be brought in when we talk about things like defense, um, the border and all of these things, illegal immigrants coming over, and even to this day they risk life for them to get here, for a better life, um, and then there's the criminal element. Even though experts say that they don't think that it's going to decrease violence in this country. Um, but it has to increase it if they're coming over. Imagine if you're a criminal, say in Mexico, and you go to the United States, you sell a lot of dope and you got a lot of freedom and liberty to do a lot of things. And so you're adding to the criminal element. So even if the attitude is it's not going to decrease it, it surely will inflate it. The more that come over, the more that dig in and do dirt, the worse it's going to be for the indigenous that's already here. So from that platform, I understand why Trump wants to try something to deter this, So, um, but yeah, so the two experiences should never be intertwined nor forgotten, and that's the part of Ben Carson's statement that I really embrace this. That it shouldn't be forgotten. That because we they sacrifice for what we have today as people of color, and as for minorities and for women and everything else. Um, you know, if we forget our roots, a lot of times we'll go reckless, and like I said earlier, we'll make choices that we may can't reverse it or take back, and that may not be helpful for us or for our children or for future people in general. You know, so where Carson was going with all of this is that he's saying we really need to embrace the full history of immigration in general. Um, I guess it can go illegal, legal, um, voluntary, and involuntary. But my focus tonight is pretty much on voluntary and involuntary immigration. Um, and he says here that the descendants of the enslaved call ourselves African Americans, not Ghanaian or Guinean or Sierra Leonean Americans because of this ancestral rupture and exile. We cannot specify what we do not know, unless we're more recent true immigrants from Africa. Wow, that's a pretty deep statement, you know. And then they were talking about the three-fifths compromise, which is really um, they did that to vote. They figured that you have slaves and everything, but they only count for three-fifths of a actual person, I won't go into it tonight deeply, but it's a story. I wrote papers on it when I was an undergrad because I found it really fascinating. Um, so he's saying here, you know, he's. I mean, they were attacking him. They were just they think Carson's taking liberties with the history of slavery. Um, but he's just I'm looking at it differently. I'm thinking that he's just showing a lot of clarity. That because I've often thought that African and to my ignorance, I often thought that African Americans simply were not immigrants because we were forced there. And I totally embraced the fact that immigration is something that was just simply voluntary, that it was never involuntary. Um, but by definition, it can be considered involuntary. And we're probably the only race that has that has immigrated involuntarily. As far as history goes, I would need to dig into that deeper. I just didn't have time. Um, I mean, slavery itself crosses over many cultures. Back in the Egyptian days and things like that. Um, but to be involuntarily brought here against our will, it's a whole different dynamic. And I think as an African American and as a brilliant neurosurgeon and as someone in the politics, I think Ben Carson was simply just showing a point of interest of immigration that can get lost along the way. That we don't really put a lot of focus on. That I guess what he's trying to say is we shouldn't lose a reminder of of slavery being an immigration that was totally and completely negative. Um, and even when you see movies about slavery and things like that, 12 Years a Slave, Django Unchained, and things like that. And I was watching a couple of those um, off the YouTube channel a couple of nights ago, and it's good. It's good pictures and things like that. It's good entertainment. Um, and then I would watch the documentaries the directors and the cast would do together as a collective, and why they decided to take the role on, and how, and to my surprise, how they talked about how horrendous those times were. I don't know if they were just saying that because they are celebrities and they can't. I mean, how are you going to say, "Yeah, I played a slave owner and it was a great role" and all this stuff? Um, a lot of them said, even if they played these particular parts, how horrendous. And they were saying themselves that we should never forget those parts of our history. Um, where I'm going with all of that is that, especially for you millennials and for you young folks that may indulge into this podcast, that we need not forget those struggles that made some of the some of the things easier for us along the way. Um, and when I see kids doing things or making bad decisions, getting in all kinds, I'm not saying kids shouldn't be kids or young adults shouldn't be young adults, but I think if we re-examine our history and keep a constant, I'm not saying you got to be a historian, but just keep that constant reminder in how hard it was for them to give us certainly take advantage of today, we would appreciate it more and thus make better choices and decisions. Again, my background's in behavior, so even though I've made bad decisions, once I established an education in the background, I tend to look at life through psychological eyes and behavioral eyes to make better choices on everything, even with the confrontation with the guy. See, just overall seeing that, trying to diffuse it and trying to say it's not really that deep, it's still friends, and he stood on so much pride that he decided, I don't want your friendship anymore. He made that decision, and then and pretty much stung. I was like, wow, we're cool with each other, but you telling me because you thought I insulted your country and your culture, which I didn't, because that's and it stemmed from me saying that maybe they're watching Uncle Tommy Talks in Haiti, and that's all I said. And he something else was eating at him that day, and he decided to curse me out. And when and that, again, that's watch that podcast. You'll see my take on it. Even right now, I don't even understand it. But getting back to the subject at hand, um, also Trump had a disagreement in here, and I didn't really jump into it too deep. He has said about Ben Carson, even though Ben Carson, he says, related, Trump says he wants to fix cities and said Ben Carson will make them worse. So I'm gonna tap into that and see why he thinks that Ben Carson will make them worse. Um, he said the inner cities as the hellholes and depicted urban blacks as the tragic victims of generations of neglect. Wow, this is Trump's words. But and looking at it real quick and not trying to stray off of the topic too much. But it also has an interest in it as far as um, as far as the immigration thing is. Because right now it's a really big topic, and especially with the border wall thing going on and everything. Um, um, what this I tell you what disturbs me a little bit about all of it is because we all life's a series of choices. I'm not saying we're going to always make great ones, but I mean everybody knows that the rainbow's here, and if you're from somewhere else and you come here, um, I'm not the type to say, oh, you're going to take our jobs from us and all of these things, because this country's born on immigration. I mean, way before I was born, and will be here way after I'm gone. So I don't knock that. I don't. What I guess because of personal reasons and personal experiences, I knock the knock on this country once you've arrived. Um, you just give the country the finger, and I'm saying all immigrants do that. I'm just saying in my experiences, why I anchored into the immigration issues today and the current issues today, voluntary and involuntary. And I'd like to hear from you after this podcast. I would like to hear from you guys, negative or otherwise, because I don't get knocked. If I get knocked for my commentaries, I don't feel bad about that. I feel as though educate me so I can know better or think better and process, because every day is an education, at least for me. So with all of that said, yeah, he said his selection of Ben Carson echoes Ronald Reagan's choice of Samuel Pierce as the HUD secretary. Because Reagan also lashed out at inner cities and pledged to slash social spending. Um, but the majority of Reagan's voters did not live in cities. And like Trump, he had little support among African Americans. But maybe, and I don't want to get too much off the trail with that, but I was just interested why Trump made the statement that Carson will make them worse. Um, when I find out, I may go at that in my next podcast and see why that is. Because that's an interesting thing. I didn't. Again, I'm just winging it tonight, folks. And trying to do this. Yeah, another thing. The U.S. has 35,000 museums. Why is only one about slavery? Um, I'll tell you because people come over, and I think New York's like the pinnacle of when people arrive here, even if it's just in traveling, or if they're actually immigrating, and we have 35,000 museums, but the prominent part of it is that they built it on American history. not so much African American history, because a lot of our history was killed off. A lot of our our involuntary immigrants, I'll start calling them that for the rest of the show, were killed off. Um, and quite honestly, I'm not approving of this. Don't get me wrong, but people aren't going to really pay to just see one about slavery. They want to see the Liberty Bell and the Statue of Liberty and those kind of histories. You'll probably get more people paying to see exhibits about gunslingers from the West, or Billy the Kid, or somebody like that, which they have museums of, that people line up to go see, for criminal history. And where I'm going with all of this is that they can put out criminal histories that has a romanticism about them, and American histories that has no romanticism about them, the bad boy thing, if you will, and people will flock to go see it, and bring their young children with it. So yeah, he robbed banks and trains, but because of history, banks were treating us bad, and they'll twist that story around, totally writing off the fact that it was criminal to begin with. But you'll have African Americans museums where it'll show, and there's one here in Philadelphia that it'll show how we created, how we separated plasma and things like that, that are very interesting to know, but aren't marketed in the same way as other museums are. Because, and a lot of it, I guess, has to do with you're going to have sponsors and things like that who help keep these museums alive, and it's just money's not there. And even if you have prominent African Americans, are they spending money to keep those museums open? Yeah, we have wealthy black people in this country. Um, it'd be nice to tap some of their resources to even establish more museums and keep more museums going. But is that happening a lot? So that's something to chew on. That's something to think about. But yeah, it was a related story to the Ben Carson situation that I took up tonight. Yeah, because Carson was criticized. Again, I'm old. I got to write things down. He parsed his original statements with a generic definition, which I had stated also. There's another individual that I need to talk about. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm going to spell it. I just don't want to butcher it. I don't want to, I'm going to dig him up here, because I was looking at, I found him, and his name is John Ogbu. That's his name. He was born John Uzo Ogbu, and he's Nigerian. He was born May 9th of 1939. He died August 20th of 03. He's Nigerian American. He's an anthropologist. He's a professor known for his theories. Um, from what I dug up, he's known for his theories of observed phenomena involving race and intelligence, which is a paper I wrote as an undergrad at LaSalle about that, for a course that I had, for a psych course, obviously, because my degree's in psychology. So, yeah, and it says here how race and ethnic differences played out in education and economic achievement. He said it seems like being in a caste-like minority. The caste system is a caste system, for those who don't know, established in India, and it's a system where if your dad's a doctor, your mother's a lawyer, your uncle is a baker. Say they all have prominent careers, you're likely born into a caste system where that will be something that you will gravitate towards or be a part of. If you're a rubbish guy that takes out the rubbish, and your wife's a dishwasher, that's just part of the caste system that you're born in. It's a very discriminating system. It was interesting to learn it, because I learned it through also religion, that my alma mater, you have to take his part because it's a Catholic college. But anyway, yeah. So he's John Ogbu. I wish I can pronounce it. He coined the term voluntary minorities, which I thought was very interesting. He said some students did poorly because high achievement was considered acting white, and I found that deep. I'm going to get into more of this, and I'm not going to pour it all on the table tonight. But it was interesting to find him. He's a Nigerian American anthropologist. He was involved in this 96 controversy surrounding the use of African American vernacular English in public schools in Oakland. He wrote a book called Eminent Educators. Look it up online. Studies in Intellectual Influence, focused on him as one of four intellectual giants of the 20th century. Wow. Um, I don't know. Now, I don't know. Well, he's saying involuntary minorities, which is a subtopic from voluntary and involuntary immigration, because I didn't really get into. I kind of caught him at the last minute, so I really didn't get into him to see if he was, if his, if they, I guess being from Nigeria, because it's an interesting point that I was talking about earlier. As we're brought over, doesn't necessarily mean that we're not from Ghana or another part of, not necessarily directly from Africa. We could be brought over from other lands as well, but because I think involuntary immigration doesn't have a specific place. I don't think it only it only explains Africans being brought over as slaves. I'm sure that from other countries, there's been involuntary immigration of people from Ghana or Nigeria or wherever that were brought over. But the key of it is it's involuntary all the way around. We're forced to come here to make America better. For other people to prosper off the sweat of our backs. And I'm not trying to get I'm not trying to get on this whole Black America thing or nothing like that. I was making a distinction from the experience I was sharing with you earlier that happened there. But he had so much with the vernacular of English and things like that. I mean, I can pretty much guess 100% that he was a voluntary immigrant to come here, or his family was. I didn't. I'm gonna take a really quick look at the early part of his life and education. He was born in Ebony State. He attended Hope Waddell Training Institute and Methodist Teachers. He was a Princeton student. Um, and it really doesn't say. It really doesn't say about how he got here. Um, it just said involuntary minorities, which could be a whole another show. Involuntary minorities, because that just wouldn't touch on the African Americans. It would touch on Hispanics, Asians, and everyone else, because it's just a minority. Not that we're less than that. We're just percentage-wise smaller than than the than the statistics show of this country of who occupies. We're only 13%. So, but that's interesting. I'm going to dig into that, and and I'll go further with that. But it was just something basically I just stumbled across. That's interesting. I got to find out. I want to see if I can find video on him, and I'm going to see if I can dig him up as far as, because it's just to coin the term voluntary minorities, and I mean we just don't really peel back the layers to think of it. Involuntary minorities, you know. I mean, you could go with voluntary immigration, and then you can also break it down further and go with, if you're a minority, you're a volunteer minority, and then it's just really deep. And his thing, descendants of groups of persons who found themselves in the United States or under United States jurisdiction against their will, and that's what he has as involuntary minorities. So that's the definition of that. I'll say it again. I'll read it again. It's descendants of groups of people who found themselves in the United States or under United States jurisdiction against their will, which is really still involuntary immigration, because you're against your will. That's the whole keystone to all of that. It's against your will. But it's interesting. I don't have much more on that. But yeah, but it says involuntary minorities, example, Native Americans tend to manifest oppositional secondary differences with the dominant culture. So I call him by his first name because I really cannot pronounce his last name. I don't like to chop a person's name up really bad. Wow. So, okay. His first name is John, and I just call him that. So, he's saying involuntary minorities are Native Americans. I thought they they're native. I mean, it's almost like a contradiction. You have native and you have Americans, and then he's calling them involuntary minorities. Um, that confuses me. So I got to really get into it, and I really don't want to get off the track of it. I'm not going to talk too long tonight. Like I said, and I'm not going to. I'll shut down on maybe another 10 minutes. Because I'm still, I'm just in a fall with my news, and as I develop acceptance with it, I just need to get better, and I think just work on where do I go from here, kind of thing. But it's interesting, involuntary immigration, coming here by force, and then you have so many people trying to force themselves who would gladly volunteer to come to the United States, as opposed to us who our ancestors who were made to come to the United States and service. We didn't, we weren't promised as ancestors, our ancestors, as African American ancestors, we weren't promised, anything good coming here. It's like you're coming here to work and make our lives better, and it's pretty much as straightforward as you can pretty much say it. Um, I don't know. I don't want to babble on just to fill up the clock. Um, the voluntary and current issues. Um, with the wall together. Um, it was a very interesting topic. And voluntary and voluntary immigration, slaves weren't immigrants; they were property, as according to Ben Carson. And I'm sure you won't get anybody to disagree that slaves were property. Of course, they were property. It was sold as soon as they got here. You were sold. You were sold to your slave owner, and he did. You were property. He did what he wanted with his property. And even some of the movies I was watching, um, I was looking at that. How and I guess for some people it's really hard to watch history, to watch the slavery thing, or be reminded of it. Um, Even for people of color, I think sometimes we don't want to be reminded of it because we live in a time where discrimination goes on still. However, it's not as it still exists. I think it always will. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope even after I'm gone that it gets a resolution. It's not going to be like Star Trek where you get all these different characters. I'm a Trekkie, that's why I threw that out. That you're going to get all of these different types of entities that just they well even with them they some of the characters fought with each other. Klingons versus Romulans versus the Federation, and so forth and so on. But anyway, you would hope that it would be a better balance um, for the future. You would think that as immigration goes on a daily basis, there's people who come over legally, swear themselves in, and become U.S. citizens, and all kinds of things like that, and start wonderful lives for themselves. And I can't, and quite frankly, I can't take that away from, um, and I don't take that away from. Um, But I guess the whole keystone of tonight's discussion was because I've always thought of when you put the involuntary pre part of the word, when you put that word in front of immigration, it really strengthens the reminder of what African American ancestry had to tolerate. And it's interesting, and I think, and still, once I leave this podcast, I'm going to start digging with Ben Carson and find out. I don't even have clips. I'm that so unprepared tonight. I really want to find out why they had such a hard time criticizing. Well, why they criticized him, give him such a hard time is what I really mean to say. Why he got so much flack for it. I really hate to be incomplete about it, because um, according to this, he really got a hard time for making a statement, and he was told that he needed to put it in a different context. For a man of his education and background, I'm surprised he didn't make a challenge of that. In other words, his amendment, he can't just say that in the context. I'm thinking, well, who did he really piss off? I don't see if he's saying that if he's saying the slaves were involuntary immigrants. What's incorrect about that statement? I don't get it. Um, and I haven't done enough research to dig it out to find out why why he got so much flack for it. You know, and had to just really go by the general definition. Why are people afraid? Is it? I mean, I'm thinking, is it that people are afraid to understand the realities of Americanism and how this country came about? Because it has to be inclusive. And then it makes me wonder: is it talked about often in classes? I don't. I've been out of general school for over 30 years. You know, and it's not. It's more discussed on college campuses, in certain courses than it is in, I think, in high schools. Um, I remember when I used to be at Cheney University. That was like the first college university that I started. And I know they had this free course on Black history because, unbeknownst to me, I was very ignorant about um, Black history, President Lincoln, and things like that. And this professor had this course, and I said, well, I don't know if I have the tuition to get into it and this, that, and the third. And he said, no, it's a free course. It's something that he said it refreshes the ideology of why we need to stand strong as African Americans. Um, and I think reminding us of our history, because believe me, um, other races strengthen and remind themselves of their histories. Even if they immigrate to the United States, they have the genesis of their history comes from wherever land they're from, and I'm sure if they're proud of that, they talk about the positive things that go on, and how their lives were strengthened and disciplined simply off of their history, and you can't knock them for that. You really can't. Um, I am babbling on, so I'm going to shut it down. And believe me, people, I normally just don't close the door this early on a podcast. But it's something. But I want you guys to understand something about. You look at all the voluntary immigration that's going on, and I just want society not to forget the involuntary immigration. I'm not trying to rub hardship in someone's face and be the disgruntled black guy who just wants to talk about slavery and all of this. But again, this is an overlap from the last show I did, where I had my former Haitian friend, and I wish he was still my friend. I think he's a decent dude. I just think that and he's really stubborn. He won't even let you look him in the face or anything. And so, but with the immigration thing, I yelled at him, and when I went there, I'll say this and I'll shut the door, because I yelled at him. I said, because he said I could travel anywhere I want, I said, well, you immigrated here. If you don't like America, why are you staying here? And I said, he said, you're an immigrant too. And I said, no, I'm not. My ancestors were slaves, and that's what started this ball rolling. Because technically, by the definition, I am an immigrant. I'm just an involuntary immigrant, which is interesting. What you're going to learn each and every day. Um, I will have a better research topic next week. Um, I'm still trying to work out the kinks of and I don't want to keep beating it up, man, because it's depressing. But I want to thank my niece Naomi Minhas for giving me the platform to do Uncle Tommy Talks. She introduced me on her Thursday show, which I'll be on tomorrow. She says, this is Uncle Tommy, and so I just thought that name would be easier to stick with because they're my uncle. So Solomon Graham, engineer, and all around good dude. I'm really bad on names. We have another guy coming in too. I think his name is Jack. I wrote it down because he was on Thursday's podcast, and he's going to do a platform He's gonna open a night where it's Jack Faber had joined us on Thursday, and Jack seems to be he seems to be very smart. I was really intimidated. I was like, oh, he's really smart. I'm kind of jealous here. So I mean, he actually has a brain on him, and he spits. He probably spit way better dialogue than me, especially in the night. But he's a good dude, and you'll enjoy it. If he's on tomorrow with the rest of us, you'll enjoy us all. Who am I missing? I'm missing. I can't. Boy, I'm bad with names. My mind's just in a whole nother neighborhood. But I want to thank everybody that supports me through the hard times, because sometimes you really need people to stand beside you and care enough to help you get through adversity, whatever it is. Um, so I really appreciate that love. And for all of you, I'm sorry that I kind of chopped up this topic tonight, and I really didn't, and I was just too emotionally strained yesterday to do it, and then the day's been I've been all over the place, from arguing with the supervisor to the contracts, and she's late picking them up for the sites we do, and then I gotta get ready for an event at my alma mater, and register for the summer semesters, and it's just a lot of stuff going on. Then my car wanted to I have a new car, and it wanted to act funny, and I don't know. And people kept saying, when you buy a new car, you're gonna get recalls, and I'm not you just do it, so you're not really you're like listening, But then it acted funny. I mean, it acted funny in the way it drove. It acted funny. And so digital, new cars are digital, so it did all of that stuff, and I didn't know what to say. My sister screaming at me like, "Call a dealership. It's only 10 months old. You have a warranty." And I went into that. And with the medical news, I didn't want to handle any of all this stuff. But that is me crying into my pillow to you guys. For those who stick with me, I really appreciate you. Um, and I'll say it like this: for those who don't stick with me, you give me strength to get better, and I still pray for you. So, with all of that said, I want everyone all over, all of the lost people that lose loved ones, and I don't mean lost people like they don't know their way around, but people who lose lost loved ones with all these tragedies going on and all these adversities in life, because life's hard enough as it is. You have my unconditional blessing. Stay safe, keep your family safe, um, and stay together and make better choices. And this is from Uncle Tommy's Talks. And I'll see you next week, and I'll see you tomorrow. You guys have a good night. Goodbye.